Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to the segment where we're going to be featuring what we think are the best healthcare investors globally. And I'm super excited to have the opportunity to speak with Gurdane, who is the general partner, but also the founder of MBX Capital. Gurdane, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
Well, with that, I think you have, the reason why we reached out is I think a really impressive healthcare portfolio. And we're going to go into some of those portfolio companies and why you made those investments. We're probably also going to give you some really heavy hitter questions about what you feel is the healthcare ecosystem overall. But before I get into all that, I think it's always great to just start off so the audience has a baseline of who is MBX Capital. What do you guys do? What do you invest in? What is the fund size, the basics?
Yeah, absolutely. So MBX is a fund that we formed, my partner and I, Zishan Mohammadi, formed earlier this year. Our focus is on investing in companies that are bringing good health to everyone. So what that means to us is that we recognize that there's an amazing supply of innovation in healthcare, but unfortunately that doesn't touch everyone. And so there are many people that are neglected and underserved by our healthcare system today. And so we tend to focus our technology and software investments within healthcare on companies that are helping providers deliver high quality care to everyone. On the other side of the coin, we also make life sciences investments. And what we see in that area is that there are similarly technologies and indications that have been neglected. An example of this is we have an investment in a company called Mesa Vaccines, developing a vaccine for pediatric RSV. This is a virus that's been neglected in development for 40, 50 years. It affects hundreds of thousands of people globally every year. But we feel it's a really important problem to solve. And so when we invest, we think about obviously the financial returns that we can generate, but we also think about are we meeting our mission as a firm of delivering better health to everyone.
Awesome. I'm curious, is there a backstory about why you started this fund? I mean, you highlighted a little bit, but I'm curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So my partner and I previously ran a business called FundRx, and FundRx was a leading investment marketplace focused on healthcare companies. So think of this like a highly vetted, curated, angel list type platform. But everyone that participated in the FundRx network was a domain expert in healthcare. So physicians, scientists, and industry executives. So we built that platform over the last 5 years, and over time that business evolved into being a proprietary fund management business. So we raised our own internal capital, and we're deploying that capital, leveraging the community of wonderful experts that we built within that network. And so the transition to MBX was really a reflection of the fact that we now primarily manage and deploy capital that we've raised internally as a firm versus a marketplace style model. But we've retained a lot of elements of what we built during FundRx. So within MBX today, we have about 1,000 venture advisors globally, and these are leading industry executives, doctors, top researchers in their respective fields that collaborate with us when we make investments and to support our portfolio companies. So our view on this is basically that in healthcare, in order to be really successful, in order to really make a dent, you have to recognize that it's impossible for a single person to have all the expertise required to build something independently. It's just too complicated of an industry, requires just too much expertise for one person to have on their own. And so our view has been, there's a huge amount of knowledge in this space. Can we create an easy way to collaborate with some of the leading people in our fields to hopefully accelerate our portfolio companies and bring innovations to market faster? And so that's really the impetus for why we've built this program called the Adam Advisor Program, and really is the core to how we operate as a firm. It's very much a distributed network of individuals that we rely on and call upon to support our processes and ultimately, hopefully, support our companies in delivering better outcomes for everyone.
Awesome. And it actually it's a great segue into what I kind of want to drill down in is your investment thesis. Now, you talked about at the beginning that, you're taking on a big set of healthcare categories and looking, we're in healthcare services, they're healthcare technology, or even in pharmaceuticals.
Yep.
This is vast. I mean, this is so much information to cover. And I think you've already kind of answered the question, but how do you break this down, and how do you prioritize, and how do you, especially as your early stage fund with a relatively small team,
Yep.
how you manage to do that?
Yeah. So we really try to be thesis oriented and thematic when we invest. And for us, what that means is starting with a lot of conversations with the domain experts, right? So it's one thing to do a lot of secondary reading and read the same articles and journals and so forth that everyone else is reading. It's another thing to talk with someone that's in it day to day and is running this clinical trial, or is running this hospital, or whatever it is, and really hearing from them about what's going on in their daily kind of work. And we find that process of kind of investigation, if you will, of a variety of areas within healthcare allows us to uncover things that otherwise may be very difficult to uncover. So to give you an example of this, one area that we spent a lot of time in is in nephrology, and in particular in dialysis. This is a growing sort of population receives dialysis every year. Unfortunately, it's something that's really detrimental to quality of life. Going to a hemodialysis center, kind of regularly sitting in a chair for 4 hours, and kind of having to disrupt your life and your day, really hampers quality of life. And so through a variety of conversations with members of our advisor network that work in nephrology, work in strategics in nephrology, one of the things that we identified as a barrier to improving the quality of how dialysis is delivered is that, there is actually an option for at-home dialysis called peritoneal dialysis, but it's relatively underutilized in the U.S. About 10% of people in the U.S. Receive dialysis at home. Compare this to Mexico, about 55% of the population receives dialysis at home, which is crazy. And so, that's better for so many reasons, right? You're not having to go to a clinic that's not the best place to sit in. You have more control over your life. It's dramatic quality improvement. Problem is, when people receive dialysis at home, they can often get infections, and if someone gets an infection in that context, it can be very, very problematic. And so we were able to uncover this core problem, what we perceive as kind of one of the core barriers to the expansion of peritoneal dialysis, which is infection management. And then that ultimately led to an investment in one of our portfolio companies called CloudCath, which basically develops infection management hardware for any catheter-based treatment. One of these approaches is focused on peritoneal dialysis. So it's a machine that you kind of put between the fluid cycler and the patient, and it basically, using an optical sensor, kind of reads what's going on and can detect infections earlier. And so this is an example of something that it would have been very challenging without leveraging this wealth of knowledge that exists in our network to identify and thoroughly vet. And now that we're an investor, to be able to really support this business. So that's kind of how we think about it procedurally in terms of where we invest.
It's a great company, by the way.
Really excited about it.
It's fantastic. In kind of, I guess, building off this question a little bit further.
Sure.
When you look at, I in my mind, I kind of just separate. There's healthcare software, and then there's pharma, and then there's medical device non-smart solutions. When you look at these ecosystems, are you prioritizing on a chronic condition and a disease, and then saying, okay, how do we look at those categories and find the right solutions, leveraging your network? Or is it more along the lines of, where does majority of the funding or the interest or majority of the most popular problem? What's the most important disease that kills everybody today? And that's just one from there. How do you break this down?
It's a great question. So philosophically, the way I think about it is that there are kind of like, if you've laid it out well, there's kind of two layers to every problem, right? How big is this problem? And then the second layer is how neglected is this problem? And to us, what that means is, how many people are, if it's a really big problem, let's take oncology, for instance, this is a great example. So there are a huge number of investment funds with lots and lots of capital that are very actively investing in oncology. Oncology is obviously an absolutely massive problem, so it's great that this is the case. But I would argue that as a result, compared to many other disease states, it's not a particularly neglected problem from an innovation standpoint. There's a lot of innovation in oncology, and we should encourage more innovation in oncology. That's wonderful. But for us as a firm, where we like to spend our time is we try to look for those problems that are really big, but that for whatever reason are being neglected, right? And what that means to us is that it provides us a couple of things. One is it allows us to make a unique impact. So this is a problem that may otherwise not be solved if not for a small handful of entrepreneurs working on it, or a small handful of scientists or physicians working on it. And there's a limited amount of capital available to them for whatever reason. And so we like to find those kinds of problems and then help bring them, into the light. And so help attract more capital and more innovation and more research to a particular space that we feel is really important. And so that's kind of, when we start to screen for companies, identify areas of interest and so forth, we try to think about it using that framework.
Okay. And you're an early stage investor, but it seems you cover from seed, but I think you also mentioned you'll follow on up to Series B.
Yeah, in some cases, we won't make our initial investments at Series B as well. So we're happy to kind of initially invest, seed A or B. We tend to lead seeds and A's. B rounds, we tend to, be pretty active, but, we're generally, relative to, our fund size, generally not leading B's, at least right now, but we'll follow on past that as well. So, our view is we'd like to support our companies through their life cycle as much as possible.
Okay. As an early stage healthcare investor, this is an industry that I think is tough because the quantity compared to any other category is so much more. It's harder, I think, to find, I feel generally it's harder to find success. And I think the average exits for the healthcare industry is probably lower than some industries like cybersecurity.
Sure.
How do you look at early stage companies? Are you looking at them as this has got to be a moonshot? It's got to be $1 billion company. You got to believe that and get behind that. Or is it more of what's practical for healthcare and solving either the disease or what's practical for putting in a hospital setting or working directly with the patient? And can we see this as something that's going to be impactful for the ecosystem?
Yeah. So I think you're actually asking a portfolio construction question. And I don't think there's one right way to do this. One fund strategy as an example, this is not our strategy, but a fund strategy could be to make, 500 seed investments, each representing, 25 basis points of their fund or 15 basis points of their fund, or whatever it is. And in order for that to be a strategy that's effective, you're probably going to need a lot of moonshots, right? If that's all you're investing in, right? Because the return profile on those is probably higher risk up front. You don't have a lot allocated to those deals, and so the multiples you need to generate need to be huge. And so that's one portfolio construction strategy. Our portfolio construction strategy is fairly concentrated, actually. So we, out of each of our funds, will make anywhere between 15 to 20 initial investments in companies. We expect 10 or so, 8 to 10 of those investments to be core investments where, the majority of our fund's capital ends up getting deployed. And so, relative to many venture funds, that's quite a concentrated strategy. The reason we pursue that strategy is because we tend to invest in businesses that we feel have, an adequate level of de-risking. So, we will in each fund make a handful of investments that, or maybe 3 or 4 investments that are, you may describe as really moonshotty, right? Where these could be binary events of great success or total failure, right? No capital returned, absolutely. But I'd say the majority of investments that we're making are in companies that have, proven they meet a real need in the marketplace, and have very attractive core economics in their business that would make it challenging for us to experience a zero event with one of those businesses. And so naturally, you might argue that restricts your return curve. But because we run such a concentrated portfolio, when we still invest, we're still expecting that there's an opportunity for each of our investments to produce, 8 to 10 times. And so, if you think about broad construction, we think that math actually works out quite well for us, while limiting our downside risk. So that's kind of how we think about constructing in our portfolio.
Okay, that makes sense. And this might be more specific question related to the healthcare software category. But it seems as though the sentiment among a lot of healthcare startups is that, they know that sales cycles are really long for healthcare providers, and they know it's really difficult to push their product ecosystem. And so they feel as though the investors that they work with got to have a longer term vision than it is with the traditional venture fund. And do you share the same sentiment?
I think so. There's a couple of points there. So one is, I think it's definitely true that sales cycle in healthcare can be painfully long. The way we think about every one of our investments though is time to a milestone, time to an inflection point. So we'll take a software company as an example, right? With a business like this, I think there are inflection points at certain revenue figures, right? Certain ARR points like lead to perhaps multiple expansion of these businesses, right? So there are definitely, I think a big consideration we have is what's the duration to achieve that milestone? Some companies have longer sales cycles. Some companies have faster ones. We try to index on the ones that are faster, right? And so that means there's a lot of companies that we won't invest in because the pace of development just isn't rational for how we're constructing our fund. But it may be the case that, with a business like that, there's a long seed period, maybe 4 or 5 years of kind of like getting the first handful of customers, kind of proving things out, that sort of thing. And then there's a rapid acceleration, from that seed to A period where they have their handful of proof point customers, and now there's just this acceleration's happening in the business. So for us as an investor, we tend to invest at the acceleration points, right? Where we know that each, dollar of capital that we're investing is going to produce a very clear return. There's a very, clear exchange of value that's occurring. And so, that certainly means that we're very appreciative of funds that go even earlier and are willing to take that longer seed period horizon. But that's just how we think about it.
Okay. Makes sense. And in one of the things that I kind of feel is kind of surveying the ecosystem of investors is that, especially non-healthcare specific focused investors, that it's really challenging for them to approach this ecosystem. What do you think? And maybe you have an idea about this, but what do you think most other investors might get wrong when they approach healthcare investing?
Yeah, so we're just talking about healthcare services and technology for a moment. So there's a couple of things. So one is just going back to this sales point, assuming that an enterprise healthcare software company will behave like a classic enterprise, B2B developer tools kind of business, just totally different. Like the way selling occurs, the type of talent that you need in place to make those sales happen is just fundamentally different, I would say. And it requires people with pretty deep relationships in industry to make, those sales sort of begin to happen. And so we generally look for, companies that have really strong sales leadership in place very early, that are being really thoughtful about their relationship development with the right kinds of people. So as an example, like you're selling into pharma, there are many different ways to sell into the pharma industry. You could sell to, business unit head, you could sell to the innovation team, and so forth. You generally want people that have long-standing relationships with the business unit head versus the innovation teams, because that's a stickier sale point for many people. And so that budget is more fixed. It's able to stay in place longer. And so that's a really important sort of layer to it. So I'd say that's one thing. I think the second thing is there's a lot of just sort of direct-to-consumer healthcare that's happening right now. And we have investments in a number of direct-to-consumer companies as well, and they can be really effective. They can also not be very effective. And so one thing that we really look for in our direct-to-consumer businesses are, is there the right clinical leadership in place where, we feel confident that the quality of care, quality of service, quality of whatever offering they're delivering is what it should be. I think there's unfortunately been a little bit of a the commoditization of healthcare service delivery as a result of some of this this direct to consumer leaning sort of trend. And long run, we want to be in businesses that are really focused on quality of patient care rather than on tons and tons of volume at a reduced quality. So I think that's an important point, as well. So those two jump out to me right now. I'm sure there's many other things, and we talk a little bit more about them later.
Cool. I wanted to now switch gears in talking a little bit about your portfolio. Awesome portfolio. You have, I think it almost stretches of the 29 companies. You hit almost every single healthcare category, at least from the category that I looked at. It's big. It's like I said, it touches a lot of different categories. Do you think this can be limiting though, in some sense? You invest in a health management tool or telemedicine service tool. You think that category now is off limits?
So fortunately, no. Because so I'll give you an example. So we're in a really exciting business called Brightside Health that's focused on basically digital first care for depression and anxiety. They're one of these companies that I think, really is taking a really robust clinical approach to how they manage medicines and care for their patients. Now, Brightside, if you just think about the number of patients that suffer from depression and anxiety in America, just an astronomical number of people, unfortunately. And so, one might argue, well, now you can't invest in other telemedicine businesses because you're an investor in Brightside. But the reality is, because healthcare is so huge, these markets are really, really large in and of themselves. And so, Brightside could be, a very large business, really continuing to just focus on delivering amazing care for those two indications. And I think there will be a very large business just focusing on that to start. And so, what that means is we have a lot of ability to invest in companies that are doing similar but different things in different categories in healthcare. And so it hasn't created too much of an issue from that standpoint. We have, I think 4 or 5 different companies focus on the behavioral health space, but they are all doing very different things, serving very different patient populations. And so part of the beauty of our industry is that it's just very large, and so you can do that.
Right. And when
you're not winner takes all, actually, that's maybe the last point I'll make is that, in healthcare services in particular, these aren't categories that often have wholesale domination by a single business. Like that's quite rare, I think, in healthcare. On the services side of things, there's too many people for that to be feasible. And so what you tend to see is, there's many different kinds of solutions for similar problems, and they all have, a portion of share. But even if you capture 10% of share in one of these categories, that's still a very big business. And so it makes it still venture backable, even though, whereas in tech, perhaps you're looking for kind of a business that will become a de facto monopoly. That's extremely rare in healthcare for that to occur.
Okay. Makes sense. And I know you basically, you kind of already touched on the healthcare ecosystem, but looking at your portfolio, I'm just curious, when you lay out healthcare landscape. You say, all right, there's 20 main categories in healthcare. We're going to make an investment in each main category. And that's Is it, you might be repeating yourself again, but is that not necessarily, is that your approach, or is it more of, let's just focus on, where we need to need?
It's not our approach. So, I think it's happened. We've been investing for 5 years that we've had investments across a variety of categories in healthcare. But it's not our approach to say, okay, we have to make, one, oncology investment and, one, nephrology investment and one this thing and one of that thing. Very much not how we operate. It definitely starts with, you can actually see it in our portfolio. So, we have a number of nephrology investments. We have a number of urology investments. We have a number of investments in hydrogel technologies. We have a number of investments in behavioral health. So what's happened is that even though it appears we have investments in kind of each of these buckets, in a wide variety of categories, they're actually quite clustered around areas. So there's often maybe an indication in common or something like that, even though they're taking attacking very different parts of the problem. So that's really how we construct.
Okay, that makes sense. And I wanted to, it'd be great to go through every single portfolio company and really break down why you made that investment, but we won't go there. I will just, let's talk about the companies that you're board of directors of. The Contraline, the Care Rep, the Atlas Health. Contraline is more of a product, I would say, and then the other two are I consider them within the health management or platform tools. But can you talk about why you made these investments, maybe what those companies are, why you made those investments?
So maybe we'll talk about Contraline first. So Contraline, we were a seed investor in the company, led the Series A. What they're doing is, I think, revolutionary. So, over the last, 30, 40 years, there's been a burden of contraception that's been placed primarily on women. And so women are sort of had to take on the responsibility of contraception and relationships and so forth. So, between birth control and IUDs and things like that, that's kind of all fallen on them. Unfortunately, what we're finding as time goes on is that, while these products are generally safe, there are an increasing number of side effects people are kind of being aware of. Maybe they don't want to do. And so you're seeing, in some cases, people being less willing to use, the pill in some cases because they don't enjoy kind of the hormonal interaction that occurs from it. It's not pleasant. And for some people it's great, for some people it's not. Same case for IUDs and so forth. So there's different solutions that work for everyone. But unfortunately, it's all fallen on that half of the population. And, there's been a variety of attempts historically to develop male contraception. And people have kind of said, well, men are never going to do this. We're not going to take responsibility. So I actually don't believe it. I think that certainly in younger generations these days, I think there's an increased willingness and recognition of men that it's their responsibility as well. And so what Contraline is doing is building a tool in that arsenal. And so Contraline is developing effectively what is a male IUD. It's a non-hormonal, reversible male contraceptive. So this is first of its class kind of device. And it's quite simple. It's a hydrogel that's inserted into the vas deferens. It could hypothetically be done in an in-office procedure in 10, 15 minutes by a urologist and effectively provide 2 years of non-hormonal contraception. And this can be really valuable for men in a variety of ages. It's a great alternative to vasectomy, but also a great alternative for just ongoing general contraception. And so we think this has huge potential. And so for us, the reason why we made this investment is one, we think Kevin and Greg and their leadership team are brilliant. They've been working on this for a long time. They know the space better than anyone. Their likelihood of success is very high. In making this happen. And two, we have conviction that this is going to be a category that matters in the long run. There are, frankly, there are a lot of investors that don't. If you talk to, this is probably one of these more controversial investments where some people just don't believe that men are going to do this. I think they will. And as a result, we're very bullish on where this one's going to go. So that's Contraline. pause there if you have any questions on that, but happy to talk about Atlas and CareRev as well.
No, it's awesome. I think this gives a great description and overview, and I think, please continue.
Great. So maybe I'll tell you about CareRev next. So CareRev is a business here in Los Angeles. One of the scrappiest teams of people that we've had the privilege to work with. Probably the most capital efficient company that we've ever worked with. I mean, they've really achieved a lot, with limited amount of financing to date, which is amazing. Really, the problem that they're solving is hospitals, unfortunately, do not do a very good job of responding to changes in patient census. So COVID is a good example of this, unfortunately. If you have a lot of people show up at the hospital that you weren't expecting to show up at the hospital, you may not have enough staff, in particular nursing staff, to provide high quality care to all of them. The reason, the founder of this business, Will, knows this problem so well is he used to be a nurse. And so what he observed was that there are a number of situations where, you had staff in one department at a site owned by the same health system kind of idle, but then you had another sort of problem in one facility where you had a ton of patients in place and you didn't have enough staff to treat. And so there's a whole workforce management problem that happens there. In parallel, what you also see is that a lot of hospitals have to use travel nursing services and other kind of outside staffing solutions, I'll call them, in order to kind of meet seasonal demand, right? So there are periods during the year where people just get sick, or flu season, that sort of thing, where you need more people. And so it's very expensive and costly to, basically hire someone, from another state to come and travel to where you are and work at your hospital for, 16 weeks and then go back and all that. And it's not a great quality of life. The person has to do that traveling and so forth too. But there's a lot of, interest in the nursing community around kind of, expanding shifts and working between facilities and picking up shifts in a more flexible manner. And so what CareRev has done is they basically built a staffing solution that hospitals can use to manage their own workforces across facilities and move people to where the demand is, and then augment their own facility staffing by using the CareRev marketplace, which basically is a community of nurses that can pick up shifts on an ad hoc, as needed basis when there's changes in demand. What's amazing about them, and what's really, I think, the differentiating point of this business, is that they're able to fill 90+% of shifts within 12 hours. So like, these are same day fills where you have people showing up when you need them, and that makes a huge difference to quality of care. And so for us, just knowing this customer space, knowing the needs of health systems, demands of health systems, it made a lot of sense to invest. So that's why we're involved there.
That's awesome. And it feels like a lot of the innovative workforce management tools, they kind of center around the nurse or the actual doctor themselves, and making sure that they feel comfortable with setting their price, their timeline. And it feels like it's more of a marketplace for them. And then it includes providers to say, we got the resources, we got the tool set that makes it easier for you to manage your schedule as well. It seems like it's a very interesting use case. It's like a I don't want to say it's a glorified LinkedIn. I think it's very different. But having that network of profiles it seems like also they, for a handful of them, making sure that a lot of these nurses have the right credentials and they're keeping up to date.
Yeah, there's a whole interview process that has to happen to validate people's credentials. And it's very specific, right? Someone may be a very good med-surg nurse, but not a great ICU nurse, right? And so you got to figure out what they're comfortable with doing, what they know. You match them to the right opportunities where they can be successful, and so on. And we have a huge nursing shortage in this country, and so this really helps, make the way that we're working with our healthcare professionals more effective for everyone.
And is CareRev a part of that category of companies that have struggled to sell directly to providers, or is they have a much easier time because it's not an integration? It doesn't seem a complicated integration with an existing HR solution, et cetera.
So look, I think everyone will have their periods of figuring out how they sell into providers and so forth. I think CareRev is very clearly meeting a pain point that people are going through day in and day out, especially right now during COVID. And so for them, they have relationships with a number of really fantastic health systems. And initially, it's easy for them to just demonstrate, here's the value we can bring to the table, because you're right, at the starting point, there doesn't have to be integration. And over time, they have a SaaS offering that, can integrate with a broader system. And that takes a little bit longer, but, there's a great starting and entry point for them to kind of prove how valuable their offering is.
Gotcha. And then the last company that
Atlas.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Atlas is really exciting. So we co-led this seed round alongside Global Founders Capital last year, and this was one of our earliest investments. Ethan, the CEO there, is amazing and has spent a ton of time kind of really digging into pain points that both patients have from a financial standpoint, as well as hospitals and health systems have from a financial standpoint. And so we had a number of conversations with hospital CFOs over the course of the year to really figure this out. And what Ethan learned was, unfortunately, on the one hand, you have still a very large uninsured population in this country that receive medical bills that are just crazy. Right? I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars. Think about someone that's getting a IV infusion drug in an oncology center. These drugs cost $20,000 per single dose. So, if you're an uninsured individual, you're, you have a relatively low income, this is a devastating amount of medical debt to accumulate. And so Ethan really wanted to try to figure out how to solve this problem of how can we really eliminate this debt for people? And so, on the other side of this equation, you have the hospital. And, for the hospitals actually are struggling in many places around the country. It's kind of many people outside of healthcare don't know this, but a lot of the volume in healthcare is moving to ambulatory surgical centers and, kind of individual offices, and shifting away from kind of the core hospitals. So hospitals are not doing that well as a group. And, it's challenging for a hospital when, they deliver an IV infusion drug to a patient that they've paid a pharma for at a very high price. And then unfortunately they don't get paid for it, right? So that's bad on their balance sheet. And so what Ethan was trying to solve was, how do you fix that for both parties? And what he discovered is that there's actually a huge amount of philanthropic aid available to patients like this. And this aid comes from private foundations, it comes from the government, it comes from the pharmaceutical industry itself through copay assistance programs and drug reimbursement programs, a variety of programs like that. And it often can come from many of these folks who are just eligible for Medicaid, and it's not a fun process to enroll in Medicaid. And so you can solve this by just enrolling someone. And so what Atlas does is they basically look at a particular patient situation and then algorithmically match them to programs that they're eligible for and apply for those programs on that patient's behalf. And so in some cases, before a patient even receives a medical bill, they've already dealt with a lot of that bill for them through this matching. This is hugely valuable to the hospital because now they don't have bad debt sitting on their balance sheets or on their books. And it's great for the patient because now you have a much smaller, hopefully, bill or hopefully no bill in some cases. And so that's really what they do. So for us, frankly, my view is it's really a shame that a company like Atlas needs to exist in a country like this. That we have people that unfortunately struggle in this way and can't deliver great care to them as a result. But unfortunately, it is a real problem. It's a huge problem, and felt like one really worth solving. And what's great about this business, from just as an investor, you also have to think about this layer of it, is it's solving a real sort of revenue problem for someone that would be willing to pay for it, the hospital as well. And so that means that they've also, often there's businesses like this that have a beautiful mission, but don't have that economic equation figured out right, where it's not a sustainable or scalable thing. And in Atlas's case, they really figured that out. So we're really excited about what they're doing and so happy to be part of that journey.
It's very neat because I feel like most companies that are within the payment space are just trying to figure out how do you engage with the patient to encourage them to pay or try to figure out what is the right codes that they are associated with and appropriately bill them. But it's interesting how they take the position of the actual patient.
Yeah.
It's really reassuring. I had two more questions on the investment portfolio, and then general market question, and then I wanted to get into what I think is your unfair competitive advantage as a fund. But second question that I noticed, I guess, with the makeup of your portfolio is you have companies within the health management, some that are kind of in the telemedicine or the provider care management tools, some that are in the device category. And when I look at this ecosystem, I just feel as though these categories are colliding in a lot of different ways and they overlap in a lot of ways. And how do you separate whether or not, for example, like a chronic condition needs to be managed with a device or it has to be managed with the health management consumer tool? Yeah. Or the provider should be managing this tool, or should be a telemedicine service? Like, how do you navigate that?
You've hit on an awesome point. So when we talk about where we like to invest, something that we often share is that we like to invest in companies that are experiencing edge effects in some way. So edge effects is this concept borrowed from ecology, actually, where you notice that between two ecosystems, at the edges of two ecosystems, you often notice a huge amount of biodiversity in that area, kind of connecting them where they meet, and it's a very rich area for the broader ecology of the region and so forth. And so, borrowing from this concept, we really like to invest in companies in healthcare that are taking advantage of effects kind of at those edges between two subsectors of healthcare, between two areas that maybe seem orthogonal to one another for whatever reason. So a good example of this is we have an investment in a company called MyDear. Parent company is called Neuromotion Labs. This is a business basically developing a gaming platform to treat hyperactivity disorders in children. So on the one hand, they're treating a real clinical indication, and this company spun out of Boston Children's Hospital. There's real clinical data around this. So it sits at the edge of almost the pharmaceutical industry in the way that they think about treatment and delivering care and clinical efficacy and trials and so forth. At the same time, they also deliver services. So they have coaches that support parents in their journey of coaching their child through the MyDear platform overall. So they sit at that intersection of healthcare services as well. And they also sit at the intersection of just kind of healthcare tech too, right? They have this whole digital gaming platform where kids can learn to manage their emotions more effectively and so forth. And so what you're seeing is this conglomeration of these three different subsectors that makes for a very rich and very effective offering. And so that's really, I think, one of the most exciting things about where we invest.
Do you have a hard stop in 10 minutes?
I do, yeah.
I'll skip through. I want to jump to the question that, I guess, let me follow up on that question, then we'll end with the last question that I have about the fund competitive. When you look, just slightly build off of that, and I think you already answered it, but when you look at a healthcare ecosystem, do you try to look for what I would say platform plays, as opposed to saying this is a specific solution for a specific service or a specific pharmaceutical product for a specific disease, or is it more of you take the approach of, can I look at something that is going to be applicable for a variety of different use cases across the healthcare?
Agnostic. So it depends on the business, right? So in some cases, it's, if you think about, we have a small number of investments in molecules and in individual drugs. They tend to have, a lead candidate. That's kind of their core program. Most of the dollars in the business are focused. They often are built on platforms. And so, that it's important for us that there's an underlying platform that can be used for a variety of other things if for whatever reason the lead program fails in a clinical study. On the other side of the coin, in healthcare services, right, you take a company, like Brightside, they're very focused on depression and anxiety. I think we focused on that for a long time, but, they're building a really interesting platform to treat that broadly. So I think it really varies. We don't have a hard and fast view on it.
Yeah, apologize. It's hard sometimes to speak in general because every category of healthcare is so unique in a sense. But the last question that I wanted to just really highlight, and this is one of the reasons why I think MBX Capital, why I wanted to invite you to this conference and why I wanted to feature you as one I think of the top healthcare investors, is because you have some unique aspects of the fund. You already mentioned it, and that was your advisor program. And you have an impressive lineup of individuals, at least you highlight on your website already. Can you share more details about this advisor program again? And can you talk about why that's important and how you leverage that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the core thing here is really just that healthcare has huge information asymmetry. The information of how healthcare gets delivered in this country and everywhere is very, very siloed, right? There's certain people that know how a certain thing is done, and not everyone knows that. It's just too complicated for any one person to understand. And so as investors, we've tried to take the approach of, let's not pretend that we know everything, and let's really take learn from the wisdom of, this amazing group of people. And so, it's really taken 5 years, right? My partner and I have, kind of individually, built this group of people. It's not something that we, have open to the public, right? It's everyone that's part of the advisor group is someone that, has been, selected by someone on our team and is philosophically, I think, aligned with what we want to achieve. And so that really enables us to do something special, which is, as an early stage investor, build a diversified portfolio in an industry that's so opaque. And for advisors, what's exciting about it is that, we work with some people that, are really at the pinnacle of their fields. We're very lucky to work with David Shulkin, for instance, who used to be the Secretary of VA. For people like that, they have so many opportunities. And so what our role is we want to connect them to some of the best entrepreneurs in the industry and, enable them to partner and collaborate with them. So many of our advisors go on to actually join portfolio companies, as formal advisors, join management teams in some cases. They'll often co-invest with us. And so we carve out a portion of our allocation to enable our advisors to invest with us, in deals that are generally composed of only venture funds. And in many cases, actually, advisors, identify really unique opportunities for the firm. And in those cases, we share a portion of our carry with those individuals that introduce a company that we ultimately invest in. And so we really think about it as a partnership model, right? We don't think about it as, it's our firm on one side and we have this expert network. It's very much everyone's part of the group. And we try to build a program that's, has the right incentives for everyone, right? Where the incentive is all tied to these companies who we think are delivering really awesome solutions, being successful. And if they're successful, everyone will be successful. That's really how we try to set it up.
I think you found the sweet spot because as a venture fund, there's the two biggest problems is both the deal sourcing side and being assured that you're finding great deals, but then also the portfolio development. And you've conquered both at scale, which is incredible. And it's cool. The advisor program that you run, you give advisors a lot of benefits, and it's really cool. I don't think I've ever seen a fund that has an advisor program. This is awesome.
Well, thank you.
Gurdane, I think that's at the end of our time. Thank you so much for taking this opportunity to chat, share with the audience your perspective. And I'm really happy that everyone can get a kind of an insight of, who is MBX Capital and exactly how you approach the healthcare industry. And before I close out, is there anything else that you wanted to add or any asks for the audience or anything else?
Well, I would just say maybe two things. So one is certainly just Kyle, thank you for having me and hosting this and bringing this to the community. And it's really fantastic. So thank you sincerely. The only other thing I would say is, we recently launched an office hours program for underrepresented founders and future founders, people that are thinking about starting a company in healthcare or in life sciences. Where our team is kind of on a weekly basis meeting with folks that are really just exploring stuff, thinking about, how to launch their next business, from communities that are really underrepresented in healthcare. So, the Black community, Latinx community, and so on. So certainly, if anyone in the audience knows anyone that would benefit from that, please send them our way. Always happy to chat. And our view is, everyone needs healthcare, and you need people from every background to build a better system. So we really want to encourage that, and hopefully we can meet some great people through the program.
Awesome.
Great.
Gurdane, I really appreciate your time.
Thanks.
This was fantastic.
Have a good one.